Hello, I'm discussing a paper by Wendy Drury. It's called Conferencing in Schools, Punishment, Restorative Justice, and the Productive Importance of the Process of Conversation. It was published in 2004 and it comes from a little but strong country called New Zealand. So in her introduction, she quotes Skinner, and I'd like to also relay that quote. Skinner said, "When we punish a person for behaving badly, we leave it up to him to learn how to behave well." So she talks about how if learning is to be conditioned, operant conditioning, then we should be using positive reinforcement, which is really being adopted by a lot of schools presently. Most schools do have PBL, positive for learning policies, and really try to use the positive reinforcement approach towards learning. However, punishment is still there, it has a big place, and really we need to be questioning whether suspension and expulsion are punishment at all, because often that's the desired result for some students. They want to be suspended, they want time away from school, and what happens to them, we don't have a lot of time to go into, but it can be they can find themselves with criminals, they can find themselves at home alone, vulnerable. um, it can be a real downward spiral. So the reason for the test was that what happened was there were high rates of Maori suspension and exclusion happening from schools in New Zealand and at the same time high rates of Maori young male arrest in the justice system. And so the ministry has said, let's try something different, let's give it a go. And so at the time, the restorative justice seemed to be quite topical, and so restorative conferencing, which also comes from a constructionist point of view, but in a school context, was put forward for a test. So in hope for peaceful societal relationships as an outcome. Okay, so I talked about the expulsion rates, talked about the low socio factor, and so we had to ask ourselves, or they had, we ask ourselves the question, what's wrong with Maori males? What's wrong with kids from low socio-economic backgrounds? Or what's wrong with schools? Why are schools catering for a different clientele? They're catering for everybody. So this alternative to punishment, and it is a very different philosophy, this whole conferencing, constructionist, societal, it's more Vygotsky, isn't it? It's that we set up these structures so that young ones can develop and learn through the social gathering, through the conversations, through the experiences that they have in the world. And it has really, there's a whole section devoted to the productive conversation, and she even goes on to talk about ways of speaking, and that respectful ways of speaking are so important in a community sense. Can we adopt some of these lessons here in Australia? I think we can. So restorative justice actually has a long history in New Zealand, but in their own language it's called Hui. I hope my pronunciation is right there. It's very similar in that it's a consensus building, it's gathering, it's community coming together with interested participants, but the main person of concern is the victim, but also the perpetrator, but they're not out for vengeance. They're not out for an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's a very different approach. It's more that we can learn and come together stronger as a result of the incidents that's happened and grow from that. So there's this growth interest. There's this real interest in growing, learning, developing from the opportunity of coming together to talk about it and deal with it as a group. So what happens is there's community of care there, there's protocol, there's you know, definitely an authoritarian figure there who asks the right questions and leads the group, but also the other participants are volunteers and they come together and are all given the opportunity to pool their ideas. And from that pool of ideas come multiple outcomes, not just a decision from an outside point of view being made. So again, it's very, very different to a traditional punitive approach. Lots of limitations. The participants in the trial were few, only 5 schools. Time was brief, only 2 years. Success was recognised, but it raises a lot of complex questions. And cultural differences will challenge who's advantaged and who's disadvantaged. But amazingly, what's happening in New Zealand is rates of suspension are dropping, rates of arrests in these groups are dropping, significantly dropping. And so the rest of the world is actually looking to New Zealand and saying, what are you doing there that's working?